back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It is week 2 now, not even week 1. The Orioles are home all week, and the Ravens go on the road to Cincinnati this week. Obviously, we discussed the injuries at length. We're going to be monitoring all that. If you're on the WNST text service, brought to you by Coons Baltimore Ford, you'll get that first. Dennis will be here on Thursday. He'll also be here before then from 3 to 5. And, of course, Dennis was on Sunday morning. I was driving around Sunday morning doing great stuff with Luke, myself, fantasy football. All of that stuff is there for you. Luke, I guess without the injuries, the penalties would have been the big story, right? Like, I mean, at the end of this, we would have said, well, they won by 16 points. They covered the spread for all of you out there. That's really important. By the way, I'm picking the games this week. I did okay against the spread this week with Christian Horton up at Hollywood Casino Perryville, so he'll be on this week. For you with the penalties, it's the sloppiest thing in the world for these teams that don't play, let alone injuries. But penalties is something I would have bet the over on penalties Sunday morning.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an easy thing to look at. In fact, I'd be fascinated to, and I'm not saying I'm going to be the guy that does this because I've got enough going on, but it'd be fascinating to look around the league specifically for the teams who did not play their starters in the preseason. And we know that that's a sizable chunk of the league. There are plenty of teams that still play starters, but there are plenty that don't.
2/3, 20 of the teams don't play the starters.
I don't think it's quite that high, but even the teams that do, let's be clear. I mean, we're talking about a handful of snaps, right? I mean, very few teams are playing starters for multiple quarters in the preseason at this point in time. So the point is, you go from practicing and playing and shaping your preparation for the season in a very controlled environment in training camp and these joint practices, right? So you go from that to suddenly you're playing real football. Live tackling, I think that's a big factor that I've been asked some players about over the course of the week, and I know Mike McDonald's talked about it. But you have that, and when you're doing that, you want to have sound technique. And for the most part, I mean, look, we're talking about a Ravens defense that gave up 3 field goals, right?
Ronald Darby tackled. I'll tell you that right now.
No question about it. But at the same time, when you have guys who are now, when it's a controlled environment, you're doing live to the tackle or thud or whatever it is, it's not fully live football. Of course, when you take those, you take those reins off and suddenly you're playing live to the whistle, you're going to have some penalties. So you don't want to see it. And look, 13 penalties for 106 yards, it speaks for itself. I mean, it's way too many. And specifically look at someone like Justin Madubuike, who had the makings of a really good game, but he committed 3 penalties. So I think a lot of that you do chalk up to week 1. Certainly you want to correct it. Certainly you don't want that to become a big trend, a season-long trend, because if it is, it's something you'll be talking about because it costs you football games, especially when you're playing teams that are way better than the Houston Texans. But I am ready. I'm willing to chalk it up to, you go from not playing at all in the preseason, and if you're committing a pre-snap penalty on offense and in the summer, maybe you're jogging down the field and taking a lap if you're a young player. But beyond that, there's no real repercussion for it because it's practice. So you get into this environment when you haven't played any live games, if you're starting players, and you're going to have some of this. Again, you don't want to be too flippant about it. You want to correct it this week. And believe me, the coaches will be reminding those guys who committed these infractions that you don't want to have that. And certainly on offense, you want to clean up the pre-snap stuff, like Gus Edwards going in motion at one point, moving before the ball was snapped, which, by the way, that was something that was a big complaint about with Greg Roman. Maybe it wasn't 100% Greg Roman's fault all the time. I say that in jest. Things are going to happen. But the point is, a lot to clean up, and it was a very sloppy effort. Way better on the defensive side of the ball, and they certainly did the heavy lifting, but you need to clean up the penalties on both sides of the ball. You don't want to have that. And they even had some issues on special teams as it pertained to that as well. So I again, chalk it up to week 1. I'm fine saying that right now, but if we're talking about week 2, going to Cincinnati and playing the Bengals, if we're talking about that kind of a number of penalties and penalty yardage, probably going to be talking about a different outcome then. So you certainly want to play a much cleaner football game moving forward.
Well, pre-snap penalties on the offensive side at home, no.
Right.
Pushing the quarterback after the play, no.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a face mask, Ronnie Stanley getting up on a guy with his left arm or whatever. I mean, those kinds of things happen. Holding penalties when you're trying to keep somebody from killing Lamar or whatever. I almost that's in the flow of the game.
Mhm.
It's unforced errors and it's more mental errors, more not controlling your mojo, not being in control of your state, as Tony Robbins would say.
Yeah, and in the case of Travis Jones, look, was it this major kill shot or cheap shot? No, it wasn't. And anyone, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I mean, with the Ravens celebrating the 25th anniversary of the stadium, they had lots of old Ravens players there. Michael McCrary
Is
was
that
there.
what it was? Because I mean, I'm not at the game, so at
Yeah, I mean,
halftime I saw pictures of Todd Heap on the field and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had a press
yeah.
credential. I want to see my friends. But I got a text Saturday night, like 5 o'clock. This speaks to 30 years of doing this.
Mhm.
My phone goes off, and it was Ovi Mihaly, and I'm like, is that the real Ovi Mihaly? You know what I mean? So I text him back, and he needed a soft crab sandwich, so he wound up at Tio Pepe's, not Costas, because he was downtown. I would have sent him over there. Fadley's was closed. We'll be there on Friday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. But I heard from Ovi, and I'm like, well, I know they bring players back and the club level, and John Ogden's always running around and saying hello to people. And I just thought it was sort of the ambassador thing they do. I didn't realize like there was. Tell me about it, because not everybody was at the game, Luke. Not everybody was lucky like you, or spent
Right, right.
$15 on StubHub at 12:30, which is the other way to go.
I mean, I'd be lying if I told you I listened carefully to what was said at halftime about just the stadium in 25 years. I mean, they did bring the players. That they had about 40 former Ravens players that came out, and they introduced those guys before they introduced the starting offense. So that was nice to see. So it was good seeing those guys. But the point I was just to finish my thought about Travis Jones. The point was seeing guys like Michael McCrary and Peter Boulware in the stadium. You're thinking, that's not roughing the passer. And it certainly wasn't 25 years ago. It wasn't, but that's part of what you said as far as the awareness, situational awareness of understanding. Look, today's NFL, they don't want you to hit the quarterback. And if the ball's out and you can avoid touching the quarterback, let alone pushing them to the ground, you must do that because you're going to get called for it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Whether you think the call's soft or not, that's 2023, and it's not going back the other way. It's only going to get worse in that regard. And I do feel for defensive players to a degree, but again, with Travis Jones, I think that was one he could have avoided that. But it goes back to what I said, my previous point about the penalties. You're talking about a guy who practiced all summer, and he did play in the preseason a little bit. So, not that he gets a full pass, but a lot of these guys, they didn't tackle to the ground at all. They weren't going to hit Lamar Jackson whatsoever. So you kind of get to this point where you're playing so controlled, and then it's, hey, go play a 60-minute regular football game, and you better tackle, and you better hit, and you better not let a guy get free. You're going to have some of that. But again, you don't want those. I mean, those are killers. Those are drive extenders. That can be the difference between a punt and a field goal, or the difference between a field goal and then a touchdown. So you have to clean that up. Travis Jones learned his lesson the hard way, and certainly we've seen other guys do that in recent years. We
Well, I
used
saw
to talk.
Harbaugh chewing their asses over on the sideline
Yeah,
with the D line.
sure, no question. And we talked about this for years. I mean, Matthew Judon, who is doing his thing in New England and continuing to play at a high level for the Patriots. One of the few Ravens players who, they bid farewell to, and he's done a really nice job for himself. But how many times over the years do we look at someone like Matthew Judon and just say, that penalty was, wasn't smart. Whether you think it was ticky tack or not, it wasn't smart. And I think that's the key, and that's what makes it so challenging for the defense. But again, it's the reality, and that's something you need to clean up. To your point, you can deal with some of the other penalties that just happen, and it's just a physical mistake. You want to avoid the mental mistakes. I think, and certainly you don't want to have too much of that. But overall, the defense played really well, and I think especially the second half. After they give up the 2 field goals at the end of the first half, which I asked Patrick Queen about that, and he was on tilt about it. He was not happy about that. You could tell that some of the defensive leaders that they weren't thrilled with how they played, despite the fact that they only gave up 9 points, and they got a lot of heat on CJ Stroud in the second half. But they want to play cleaner. They want to be more consistent, and they know, doing that against the Texans is one thing, but going to Cincinnati week 2, Joe Burrow, a ticked off Bengals offense. That's going to be a different challenge for them, especially if they don't have Marlon Humphrey and especially if they don't have Marcus Williams out there in the secondary. So if you're down a couple of your key guys, especially on the back end, boy, you better play sound football and limit the mistakes and the penalties, or that's going to kill you.
Luke, you know, I was doing some writing last week, some writings of writings at columnists, a letter to Steve Bisciotti, a letter to John Harbaugh. So I'm writing these letters, releasing them, getting all this input and all this. It's 11:30 at night. And you know, I never watch television, right? Like I am famously not a television guy, just for having it on or background. I'm more of a music guy than a television guy. And I like literally was a little worn out, a little emotionally spent, a little edited spent. You know, I mean, I'm writing 8,000 word tombs, the final letters, my death letters to John Harbaugh and Steve Bisciotti, other than my actual columns here when they play football games. But put the television on late at night the other night, and the first thing that came on was the Bullies of Baltimore. Like I just clicked the television. I don't know why it was on ESPN. It had to have been my wife. And everything you talk about with all the old players being here and hitting quarterbacks late, and that part in Bullies of Baltimore where Billick said they've legislated all of that out of the game at this point. And 20 years later, for Peter Boulware to come back after playing on those teams or Michael McCrary and saying, it really is a different game in that way. And when I watched the Bullies of Baltimore, not only, you know, seeing Kevin Burns, seeing Goose alive, it made me text Marvin in the middle of the night. So Marvin and I were going after it a little bit. I threw Del Rio a note because I saw him. And but the game now, when you watch the old stuff, it's a different game. And I guess that's the only game Travis Jones has ever known is this game, not the game McCrary's played or the game Ray Lewis played or Ed Reed played. But it really, the game's different. It is.
It really is. And I mean, I noticed that on a couple occasions that there were some, the Ravens still laid some hits on Houston players. I mean, there's no question about that. There were a couple hits over the middle, a couple passes that Stroud threw over the middle where there was a big hit. And what's your reaction 25 years ago was just to react and be like, oh, wow, he popped him. The reaction now is what? When that happens,
that's a flag.
You're looking to see if there's a flag or not. And, there's still plenty of instances where there isn't, but that's your natural reaction now rather than just react to the hit, with the testosterone flying around, right? When you're watching games with your buddies or whoever, that was just how it was. And that's how it's changed. Again, it's not that there's no physicality. I thought the Ravens played physical on Sunday. I thought the defense played really well overall. Again, penalties aside, they gave up 9 points. They gave up 3 in the second half, and that was a sudden change, post turnover situation. So they certainly did their job, as they should, against a rookie quarterback and against the team that had the second overall pick in the draft. I mean, that's just where it should be, especially playing at home. But I was pleased with what I saw overall. Roquan Smith was fantastic. Patrick Queen played really well. Shout out to Ronald Darby, one of the newest Ravens, a guy who is 11 months removed from an ACL injury. Didn't arrive. I think his first practice was August 17th, August 18th. He had 3 tackles at the line of scrimmage or for a loss. I mean, for a corner, that's pretty good. That shows, despite the fact he's not the biggest guy, he's going to fit right in if he could stay healthy, because he showed the willingness to be physical there. And what the Ravens want out of their corners in that regard. So there were plenty of good things. And, it was nice to see the pass rush get going in the second half. David Ajabo with the strip sack, which I think was huge just for his confidence, if nothing else. We talked a lot about how underwhelming the preseason was for him. And I mean, he played into the third quarter against Tampa in that last preseason game. That tells you what the coaches thought about his preseason, the fact that he was playing that deep into the last preseason game.
He needed the reps.
He needed the reps, and they wanted to see something. So it was good to see that translate then to, a game that actually counted, a game that actually mattered, that he stepped up the way that he did. I asked Owe about that, and he even said that, when you're a young guy, and he was talking about himself when his rookie year, you're a young guy, you make a big play early on that, that can, that galvanizes you a little bit. That energizes you a little bit to say, hey, I can do this. It's not college anymore. And these guys are better than going up against, the Big Ten opponents like Ajabo did a couple years ago, but it doesn't mean I can't play. So you hope that's a sign of more to come for him. It was good to see the defense get pressure on Stroud in the second half. My goodness, they should, considering the state of Houston's offensive line. I mean, they were down to already their third center. The right tackle was placed on an injured reserve during the week. I mean, on paper, if that group's fully healthy, the Texans might have the makings of a decent offensive line eventually, but that was the kind of offensive line that your front should get after a
Dude,
rookie
it was the
quarterback.
fourth preseason game. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a bad team. That's a team that's going to win 2 or 3 games for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to ever say that a team's only going to win 2 or 3 games, but even a best case scenario, that feels like a team that maybe they find a way to win 5 or 6, but they're certainly not going to be any better than that, right? I mean, when you have a young team, I mean, they're rebuilding. They have a new head coach. I think I credit DeMeco Ryans for being aggressive in a couple spots. Me, I go nuts over coaches that just they play to not lose by too many points rather
Yeah,
than
but going
take
for it on
some
your own 40 on the first set of downs, like what?
that one right. I agreed on that one, but a couple of the other decisions where he's a little more aggressive. I like seeing that. I mean, look, when you're in that spot, a rookie head coach who has a rookie quarterback making his first NFL start on the road, you're trying to walk a line between doing the things that you need to do to give yourself any semblance of a chance to win while also trying to protect your rookie quarterback. So it is what it is. But to your point, yeah, if the defense didn't play like that, and if Houston somehow found a way to score 20 points, then yeah, we'd be talking about this defense in way different terms. Marlon Humphrey or not, Marcus Williams or not, like that shouldn't happen. So the defense did what they were supposed to do on Sunday. And like I said, because of the questions with the pass rush, it was good to see Ajabo flash. It was good to see Matabike do what he did. I thought Owe played well. So it's a start. Way bigger test coming now going to Cincinnati again. The Bengals are going to be in a foul mood as they should be because they got embarrassed on the road against Cleveland. But the Ravens are going to have to be sharper. And as we said, certainly have to limit the mistakes and the penalties to a far greater degree than they did on this past Sunday.
That don't tell the ladies in the press room there whom I love at the Raven Stadium, who I'll probably never see again in my life, but that's okay. For me with the game, over the weekend and sort of being where I am and the game starts, right? So it starts and I'm watching and all these numbers are flying around. I'm like, where's my flip card? It's the first time in my life I haven't had a flip card for football games. Mueller used to laugh at me up in Section 513 because I would bring a stack up. I would go down to the press room, say hello to you, go up to the seats that I paid for in Section 513, and I would take a stack of flip cards and give them to everybody up in my area so they weren't yelling at me. Hey, Nestor, who's number 24? Who made that? Who's the guy with the dreads down there? Is that a new safety they got, number 24? Is that Dominique Foxworth? Who'd they bring in there? And then you're like, oh no, that's like a linebacker. That's like the number 1 overall pick in the draft. That's like Clowney. Like these numbers, I don't want to be the old guy, get off my lawn, but dude, I have to start getting a flip card here, or I'm not going to be able to watch football the right way because it's the only way I've ever watched football my whole life was with a flip card.
I know at one point, and I'm not saying this to patronize you, but believe me, I know at least at one point you could print it off from the team website. I'm not saying that to.
I haven't. Can I email Chad Steele and get that information? So for me with Clowney and with these guys getting after it, the Williams thing, it's still. I mean, Humphrey's not coming back this week. Williams and the loss of him and the Peck that we think's not going to be good. I mean, this is we can talk about the offensive side and Dobbins, but you start losing safeties for the year. That's not good either.
Yeah, and I mean, you hope for the best here. I mean, the initial reports are concerns about a torn pec. That doesn't necessarily mean season ending, but that is a long-term injury. You'd be talking about probably gone till December, right? Which is, they lost Marcus Williams in week 4 last year with the wrist injury. So it's unfortunate. Here's another guy who hardly missed any action at all in New Orleans and suddenly, having injury issues in Baltimore. I mean, it is what it is. But the difference now, and some people will say, hey, Geno Stone played pretty well last year in place of Marcus Williams. But keep in mind, they had Chuck Clark in that scenario. Chuck Clark is in New York and unfortunately suffered a torn ACL. He's not a Raven, and he's not healthy anyway. But the point is, when you look at how the Ravens played on Sunday, and I think you're going to see a lot of this. We saw Ardarius Washington as their primary nickel. And that wasn't surprising. We talked about him a lot over the summer. He had a strong summer. Won the job. Great. He's 5'8", 178 pounds. My point with that is there are going to be instances, depending on matchup, depending on your opponent's personnel, where he's not going to be the nickel. And we saw that even on Sunday. There were a number of times where the Ravens went to 3 safety looks before the Williams injury. And what did they do? They brought in Geno Stone next to Marcus Williams. Kyle Hamilton slid back into that nickel spot that he played so well in the second half of last year. Quite a difference. You go from a 5'9" or 5'8" nickel to a 6'4" nickel. So now, if Marcus Williams is out, you're a little more limited in how you can operate there. You go to a position where Geno Stone comes in for Marcus Williams. Kyle Hamilton's a starting safety this year, but now you have to kind of figure it out and kind of look at how you want to handle this. Do you want to do it where Hamilton goes down to the nickel spot and then Ardarius Washington plays off? He's a natural safety, even if he doesn't have the ideal size for it. Or do you put Daryl Worley in the mix? And we saw that a little bit on Sunday as well.
Well, we're going to get to know some of these names, aren't we?
Well, and Daryl Worley's been around a couple years. I mean, he's been a guy who's been on their practice squad, and we've seen him in a pinch play some corner. They transitioned him to safety this year, so I think
so. A lot of Stevens back there, and we've been hearing about him as well, right? So
Brandon Stevens was one of their starting corners because, and I know some people complain to me on Twitter about that, and I get it. Brandon Stevens is a guy who, as much as he flashes and has ability, he has been a guy who just has not been able to play the football. And we saw that on an instance on Sunday. He goes for an interception and it ends up being a 20-yard gain then. But he was the one corner they had that was available all summer. He practiced all summer. His availability, which, when we're talking about guys getting hurt, that's what matters. Nothing else matters if you're not available on the field.
Right?
So it is a case. It is the case, especially with Marlon Humphrey right now, until he's back. I would not think he's going to be back this week. If he had any shot to play against the Bengals, you would have thought he'd be back on the field at least a little bit last week, and we didn't see that. Who knows? I don't think he's going to be out that much longer. I've seen him walking around.
Was he at the game? I didn't see him on the sidelines.
Walking fine, but
on the game, he was there. Okay.
As far as I know, he was.
Okay.
I think so. I don't remember seeing him,
in
but
the mix.
I wasn't looking for him either because he was inactive. I've seen him I saw him in the locker room. Maybe all 3 days last week, and like I said, if you just saw him there, you'd have no idea he was injured. So I don't think it's going to be too much longer. But you're not going to have him against Jamar Chase and the Bengals, and you're not going to have Marcus Williams the way that seems likely, even if it ends up being a best case scenario for him with the MRI. You're certainly in a position now where, again, like I said with the J.K. Dobbins thing, you're losing some of that margin for error. You're losing some of that upside. You're certainly losing depth and a position at safety where, look, Geno Stone is a quality backup. I think they can be okay just in a one-for-one trade-off, but it does limit some of your personnel packages because, like I said, I think they wanted to have a healthy mix of Washington as your more conventional Tavon Young kind of a nickelback, but also mix Kyle Hamilton to the nickel spot like they did last year. But you don't have Marcus Williams, that puts you in a different position as far as who's going to line up next to Geno Stone under that instance. So, this is, unfortunately, like we said, it's football. It's part of the game. This is why you want to try to have quality depth at as many positions as you can, because you're going to lose some guys. But yeah, if they're losing Marcus Williams long term, that's a tough pill to swallow because we've seen, in the limited time he's been on the field, we've seen the interceptions that he had early last year and what kind of ability he has. But unfortunately, facing the likelihood of him missing some substantial time for the second straight year.
Here's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be in Owings Mills all week when he's not at Camden Yards in the evenings. The Orioles home all week. Cardinals. And then, of course, the Rays this weekend. Big baseball going on here. We're going to be talking football all week, injuries, trying to figure it all out if you're on the WNST text service. Brought to you by Coons Baltimore Ford. You'll get it first. And, of course, on Friday, I'm at Fadley's. I got my Fadley shirt on. We'll be at Lexington Market 9 until noon. Our partners from Coppin State, Dr. Anthony Jenkins, who runs the joint, as well as head coach Larry Stewart, who runs the basketball program, going to be joining us down at Fadley's. I think Leonard Raskin stopping by. I got some other guests stopping by on Friday from 9 until noon. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I will not have these these 50th anniversaries, although I do have them. I'm going to have Raven scratch-offs this week, so we're going to get lucky, as they say, on Friday at Faley's. And I'm also going to be at the Nest down at the Convention Center. We're going to talk about that later on in the week. That is the ledge that literally sits underneath of the Cupcake Baltimore Positive 25th anniversary logo right here on our screen on Friday night for the sold-out game with Adam Jones, and Saturday night against the Rays this week. So it is truly a sports week. The Ravens are 1-0. The sky is falling. There are injuries. Lamar's upright. We're going to Cincinnati. They stink this week, and Luke's got double duty. If you have not read my letter to Steve Bisciotti and our John Harbaugh, please do. I'll have a letter for Adam Jones as well as Eric DeCosta coming this week. Chad Steele and Sashi Brown will get theirs when I get around to it, because I'm busy around here because it's football season and we got a first-place baseball team. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.